For the show notes for this, you'll get more listeners if you say that we don't play any misophonia triggers during the episode, because some people often people to demonstrate misophonia, they make the sounds. So if you mention that there won't be any sounds, then that will help people feel confident.
It's the opposite of a trigger warning. We have a no trigger guarantee.
Exactly.
Probably science.
Hello everyone, welcome to Probably Science. I'm Matt Kirshen.
I'm Jesse Case.
And I'm Andy Wood.
And this is the first time we've done this on the show, where this is multiple elements from past shows coming together in one beautiful new recording, because long-time listeners of the show will know we've had, as previous guests on the show, we've had Steve Hall, who is someone I've known for as long as I've been doing comedy. We started out within a few months of each other, I think, thereabouts. His wife, Dr. Jane Gregory, who is a psychologist who talked about cognitive behavioral therapy on a past episode, and is now writing a book and doing a PhD on something else that has come up on the show multiple times, which is, I think, particularly in the early days when we were recording back in Andy and Jesse's backyard and we were a little bit more relaxed about things, and, you know, maybe people were having some drinks and some snacks, and then the snacks had to be cut out because we got I'm just making this bag of popcorn. I'm just going to have this. Jesse, do not do that. Because,
why? What's going on?
Because multiple listeners, this is the first time when I think I have this as well, but I didn't know the word for it until more than one listener wrote in to say, I have misophonia and please stop your guests from chewing anywhere near the microphone because it makes me want to put my head through a window.
Yep.
So Dr. Jane Gregory, let's start with, like, what is misophonia and what's the deal with it?
Misophonia is basically a heightened reaction to certain kinds of sounds, usually repetitive type sounds, and most typically the sound of eating and breathing are the big ones, but also repetitive, like tapping and clicking pens and dogs barking and basketballs bouncing and things like that, and getting a really intense reaction to those sounds, disproportionate to how annoying they really are.
Right, because I think someone chewing in your ear is objectively annoying, whatever your psychological state.
Yes.
But this is a level beyond this.
Exactly. Yeah. So it sounds that most people would say, yes, it's a bit annoying or a bit disgusting. But for people with misophonia, they would get more of like an anger or panic or fight or flight kind of response. So it's inherently not very pleasant sounds to listen to, but a very different reaction.
So I actually have quite severe misophonia, but it's undiagnosed. I've been diagnosed. It's so I checked out your website a little, and I don't think that misophonia is responsible for all of my. I'm not trying to make this podcast about myself, by the way. I'm just trying to connect. Just trying to find touchstones.
As long as you keep mentioning my website, it's fine. But my diagnoses would be like OCD, panic disorder. A lot of things that you mention are also maybe comorbids or, maybe a false diagnosis before misophonia. But I've never gotten the misophonia diagnosis. Is it something that you think a lot of maybe psychiatrists or cognitive behavioral therapists, are they just now getting hip to this? Or is this something that, like, has this been written off in the past? Because it really does affect your life in a pretty negative way sometimes. Absolutely. Yeah. So the main problem with it is that almost no one has heard of it, even though a lot of people have it, and it does really affect people's lives. So we just did a study on a UK representative sample, so sort of roughly representative of the population in age, gender, and ethnicity, and only, I think it was 13% of people had heard of misophonia, and 18% had pretty significant symptoms of it. So there were more people who probably had it than there were people who had heard the term before.
So this feels like almost the opposite of the first time you were on the show, you were talking quite a lot about things like OCD, and because that's where a lot of your work's been in the therapeutic practice. But talking about the a lot of people have obsessive compulsions, but it's not OCD until it becomes a disorder, until it's affecting negatively your life to a very high level, until it's just like a clinical level of problem.
Yeah, so the D part of OCD is disorder, and the way we would diagnose that is specifically if it causes a significant amount of distress or has a significant impact on the person's life, then we would consider it to be a disorder. And there's a question at the moment about whether misophonia should be considered a disorder. And there was a recent paper just from last year where a group of researchers and clinicians who had been doing some work on misophonia sort of came together to come to a consensus about how to define misophonia, and they agreed that it should be considered a disorder. But part of the problem with that is, as I said, our study had 18% of the population have symptoms of it, but I don't think 18% would consider themselves to have a disorder. And so it's a challenge. But at what point do we say this is a disorder for somebody, and can we use the same term for something if some people have it that severely that it does impact their life and cause a lot of distress? Do we want to be calling it the same thing?
Like if it actually spurs you to write an email to the podcast, then that's disorder territory.
Yeah. You'd be bordering on disorder level if you...
Yeah, I can't remember who it was who described one of our guests as, quote, like a goat. But
and not in their capital letters.
And I couldn't track it down, but I couldn't find out which guest or which listener. But I do remember that phrase. I remember that coming in. Steve, so you are a comedian friend of mine and the husband of Dr. Jane Gregory. So how's the chewing in your house? What's the situation going on?
Well, it's been an interesting journey because I think when we first got together, I don't think Jane knew, Jane was still in the process of discovering the extent of her own misophonia. And so I've been trained in the time we've been together to be slightly less annoying. The thing that annoys Jane most with me is breathing, because I think I broke my nose. Literally, the sound of me being alive makes my wife furious.
How dare you!
But I think I broke my nose at some point, and
not by me. That was not my fault.
It wasn't like, if you breathe one more time, I sweat.
Yeah.
I'm going to force you to have plastic surgery.
I'm actually fairly sure it was a comedian soccer game. I blocked out a cross from Milton Jones, and I'm so bad at football, I got it full in the schnoz, and that culminated in Jane one morning saying to me after a night's sleep, "Do you always breathe like that?" and so since then, in 2019, I underwent septoplasty. I went under the surgeon's knife purely to try and be less annoying to my wife.
My ploy worked.
And it was unsuccessful. My breathing still annoys her. So it feels like at the end of a film where the baddie is revealed to have survived at the end of the film.
This is a tragedy, not a romantic comedy.
So you guys, as a couple, avoided COVID just for the ventilator sounds. You didn't want, it wasn't the actual, you're like, I'm not going to be able to handle that.
I'll tell you what, but people with misophonia were like in their element at the start of COVID because we can spot someone sniffing and repetitive coughing from a mile away. Right. I will, if someone's coughing at the back of the bus, I will hear them and I will get off that bus.
Yeah. No, it is interesting the way I guess it was, it's interesting you guys bring this up that you, in the relationship, it sounds like you guys have made it work. So I can't, eat around my dad. I can't listen to him eat, and breathing, etc. It's not his fault. It's literally, but like I have to go outside or something. And I was wondering, this might be more of a relationship question. How have you communicated that to each other in a way where it's like not personal? Because I don't, he doesn't get it. He gets super upset at me or bummed out about it. But it bums me out too, It's
pretty hard to tell somebody that they repulse you.
Yes.
In a kind way.
Like you love them, but they repulse you.
Yeah, and literally the sound of life, like eating and breathing, and in sickness and in health. They bother you. And I mean, when we first got together, I didn't even know what misophonia was. Like, I knew that I was really annoyed by these sounds. And then at some point, one of my family members sent me this article that was talking about misophonia, and it was kind of like, is this you? And then like 3 different people sent it to me. I think it's just every single person that I've ever glared at while they're eating corn chips or something all sent me the same article. And that's how I discovered that it actually had a name and I wasn't just really uptight and controlling over people in my life.
So what stage into your psychology training did that come about? Were you already a practicing psychologist at this point?
Yes, well and truly. It was several years post qualified. So that's how little known a sort of phenomenon it is, that even someone who's sort of trained in psychology and CBT is not hasn't been taught about it in classes, hasn't been taught about it in schools. Because
am I right in thinking it was literally the phrase was only coined in, was it 2001?
Yeah, so it was just over 20 years ago, but it's only, like, the research into it has only just increased in the last few years. I think there was something like 5 studies in 15 years, and then there's been like tens of studies just in the last 2 or 3 years. Thanks to, there's a misophonia research fund that's dedicated funding just for misophonia research, and that has really helped to raise awareness. But as I said before, there's still only 13% of people have heard the term, and there was just a paper that was published, I think, just in the last week or so, that was a similar study on a US representative sample, and I think it was only 11% of people were familiar with the term misophonia, so there's still a long way to go.
What is the shape of the research that you're doing at the moment? So what are you actually studying and how?
So I'm doing, it's a clinical academic fellowship, so it's basically a research training scheme for people who are actively clinicians, so it's doctors and psychiatrists and clinical psychologists. And so the idea is that you're doing things that are directly related to your clinical practice. So we've got a clinic, so we're based in Oxford, and we've got an NHS clinic where we now see patients with misophonia. And then my research is basically trying to work out what are the aspects of misophonia that we could try and change or improve with cognitive behavior therapy. And so it's sort of breaking it down into parts and trying to test the individual parts and see what changes with therapy.
It's an interesting case because if we agree it's a disorder, then obviously you want to help people try to recover from that or reduce their symptoms when they encounter these things. But you're also like, but also chew with your mouth closed. Like it's the thing that's causing it is also bad. Let's also stop the thing that causes it, even as we try to reduce our reaction to it.
But that also seems like, you know, a lot of the, because on the last episode that Jane was on, we were talking a lot about OCD and that was a lot of your practice. But that's also, I think things like OCD and phobias and all these sort of things that cognitive behavioral therapy is really primed to treat. They are all things that are based in fact and based in reality. Like people who have OCD about like cleanliness, it doesn't mean that, oh, you shouldn't ever wash your hands or you should just roll around in shit. It's just like, no, it reaches or you shouldn't check to make sure you've turned the gas off before you leave the house or that you lock the door. Like those are all things that you should do. It's just when you then do it compulsively to a point that it ruins your life, that's when it becomes a problem. The same with like, you should have a fear of heights and of of like, or a certain amount of respect for heights and fear of venomous snakes or whatever. But again,
right.
It's when the picture of one of them means you have a panic attack. That's when it's a problem.
Right. How accurate are you being? You know, I mean, like my dad is repulsive. You know what I mean? So like, how fair am I being here? Really? Because it's...
Yeah. We want to get you towards that reasonable repulsion area.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and so sometimes for some people it's reacting really intensely to noises that other people barely even register, and that obviously is quite a problem because they really have a heightened reaction and know that other people aren't reacting in the same way. And for other people it's in a situation where other people would agree that it's disgusting or rude or whatever, that it causes a much more intense reaction than it should. And I think that's a really good question about like whose responsibility is it to change in that situation. Is it the person who's eating that way, or is it the person who can't control their reactions? And as you were saying, Matt, that it's grounded in survival. So if you think about the sorts of sounds that we're talking about, like repetitive rustling sounds and sniffing and coughing, there's signs of like a predator in the grass. And I talk about it's a bit like you're a meerkat and you're the meerkat whose job it is on top of the hill to be alert and look for signs of things that could be dangerous. And once you notice that sign, you shouldn't ignore it until you're sure it's not dangerous.
Could one of the methods, I guess one of the primordial reasons, could it be being upset at your own hunting party? Like, for not being silent enough or something like that? Because I guess I personally, I'm not struck so much with this like primordial fear as this overwhelming annoyance, almost a hatred of, it's like I'm getting screwed over.
Yeah, so the way we sort of distinguish that in therapy is it sort of a sense of threat? Like, do you feel like you're sort of in danger or something bad is going to happen? Or is it a sense of violation, like someone is doing something to you or crossing some kind of boundary of yours or some kind of expected social boundary? Right. Or is it that a fear of sort of that you'll be overwhelmed and won't be able to cope with how you react to the sound? And for some people it's a combination of all of those three, and some people it's really distinctly one or the other.
Yeah.
And if it's that feeling of anger, then there's probably it's harder to deal with in therapy, but probably a bit more to work with, because in general the person they're not actually doing it to try and annoy you. They're not trying to violate some kind of boundary. They're just going about their day. But sometimes it can feel like they're doing it deliberately, or that they don't care, or that you might have told them before and they responded badly, or they forgot, or something like that. And so then the reaction kind of grows, because the intensity grows based on all of that other meaning that gets attached to the fact that this is happening right now.
Yeah,
I was trying to remember when you were on the podcast last time. Did you talk about the questionnaire then?
I hadn't done any of this work. That was years ago. We were on this podcast literally years ago.
I know you sort of can't, like, you have to add 3 years to any memory of when something was as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a big.
It was like a couple of years ago plus 3 years.
Yeah. Well, and I definitely would have talked about it if I had known about it, because I've been obsessed with it for the last several years now. So it's all I have talked about. So yeah, if I'd been working on it then, I definitely would have mentioned it.
So what is this questionnaire?
So this is a questionnaire that's designed to measure misophonia and to sort of capture the complexity and the dimensions of misophonia. So a lot of the questionnaires that were out there, they just kind of captured a general reaction, and it was what in psychometrics terms, so measuring concepts that can't sort of directly be observed. In psychometrics terms, it was what we would call like unidimensional or one factor, which just means that it's just kind of measuring one concept. But what we thought it was much more complex than that. So we wanted to expand the number of items that people answered and try and work out what are the key aspects of misophonia. And so we came up with these 5 factors through the fancy stats that my statistician collaborator uses, and found that there's these 5 factors. So one is this sense of emotional threat, so feeling trapped or helpless when you're around these sounds, or like you can't get away from, or if you can't get away from the sounds, that you might panic or something. Another is either fearing that you'll be aggressive, or actually being verbally or occasionally physically aggressive, but most commonly people are just afraid that they'll act out. Another is feeling like there's something wrong with you for reacting this way. Another is feeling like there's something wrong with other people for making you react this way. And then another one is the sort of perception of how it limits your life. So what you don't do because you're worried about the sounds that you'll hear. And so what we discovered is that there's these 5 areas to it, so it's far more complex than just I get angry at the sound of somebody eating.
And then is there a certain score? Is there a certain score on the questionnaire that means it's sort of suitable for treatment? Is that?
We don't have a score yet that's suitable for treatment because there's no agreed diagnostic criteria for it yet. So we don't actually. It's really hard to define what that would be, and to capture that in a questionnaire, you have to do lots of interviews with people who have the disorder and don't have the disorder, and use that to extrapolate.
Is that the ultimate aim, though, to sort of get the... Because I know for, like, a lot of psychological disorders, there's a kind of, like, the sort of questionnaire, and, like, if you score more than 30 on this, then you probably have whatever the condition is. So is that the eventual aim, to kind of get the sort of diagnostic criteria test?
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of the next step for that questionnaire. So we already have a cutoff score, which is... We did some interviews with people, and this was before that big study that decided what misophonia actually is. And we interviewed people about their symptoms and how much of an impact it had on their life. And then from that, we found the score that is sort of above this. It's probably causing a burden in your life, but not necessarily a disorder at that level. Like we now need to do it with people who it significantly is distressing and impacts their life, people who it's a problem but they can deal with it, and then people who it's not a problem for at all, and then use those 3 groups to figure out what the scores are.
So where do you think you score on this?
I'm definitely in the subclinical range, because I've sort of managed to figure out how to live my life where it's not such a problem anymore. And, you know, if I'm in a room with a clock ticking, I will take the batteries out of that clock, but that doesn't stop me from having a job or anything.
Right. Yeah.
But my colleagues at my old job always knew which room I was in because the clock would just be outside the door, because the NHS has the loudest clocks on the planet. It's so loud. Once I started earning a bit more as I became a manager, I just started to replace the clocks with nice silent clocks instead. So I left my mark behind with pretty silent clocks.
So anyone who works in an NHS psychology department can know which. Oh, Jane's worked here. There's a fancy
there's a rose gold clock. Yeah. Yeah, and even with the eating thing, that when I was a kid, that used to cause me a lot of distress. There were times where I had these pigeons that lived outside my window, and I would try and create some kind of bonnet out of a pillow by tying it up with a scarf and blocking my ears with a pillow, because these pigeons outside my window were just always there and always making noise. And now I had some pigeons living up that kept sitting up above the chimney, that there's a non-functional fireplace in my room, so I could hear them, and it was like they were behind me, and it was like they'd followed me to England and was still there. But what I did, instead of putting a pillow on my head, is I just shoved a pillow up the fireplace, and now there's just a pillow in the fireplace and I can't hear the pigeons anymore.
So you currently have a pillow in your fireplace, and you're saying subclinical. That's subclinical.
To burn the house down is not something you should worry about.
Listen,
what, do you guys not have pillows in your fireplace? Where do you keep your spare pillows?
I've poisoned the neighborhood dogs. I got it handled. All right, I got a handle on this. No, I mean, I obviously you know all about this, but I wonder. To me, it seems the issue is, okay, there's a sensitivity to sound. There's a sensitivity to certain sounds, and certain sounds are very triggering. But it seems the big issue, and this would obviously go into exposure therapy or the eventual treatments, but the big issue is just the inability to focus on anything else. It's being consumed by that. It's so I've always, before I knew what misophonia was, I just assumed it was an OCD symptom. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering how you're extrapolating. Is this a symptom of an umbrella disorder, or how does it get to be its own disorder where it can be untethered from other things?
That's a great question. There's actually been quite a lot of research on that now, because originally It was being lumped in with obsessive compulsive and related disorders. And partly that was just because that's where people were showing up. And I was working in a specialist OCD clinic when I decided I wanted to start working on this, and we happened to get a couple of patients through that had it. And there are some other clinics around the world where it's the same thing. They were working on OCD, and these people came in with some sort of repetitive behaviors and strange thoughts about people who were making loud eating noises. And so it looked a bit like OCD. But then one of the things, the more people I've worked with, I've realized, depending on what's going on for that person, it actually looks like a lot of different disorders. So for somebody who, for example, if you are sitting opposite somebody who's eating really loudly, you might get an image in your mind that you want to like leap across and stick their fork through their face. And that's something that just might pop into your head, and that's fine. But if you get stuck on that image and think that makes me a bad person, that means that I'm at risk of actually doing that, or maybe I secretly want to do that, that then starts to look a little bit more like OCD, because in OCD people respond to thoughts and images as if they're meaningful when they're not. Right. Whereas we also had, like, I worked with somebody who when they started to get angry, their heart would beat really fast, and then they started to worry that their heart would explode. And so they were worried that the anger of the sound would then lead to their heart exploding, which looks a lot more like panic disorder, where people misinterpret their bodily sensations as a sign of like impending disaster. And then there might be people who don't go into social situations because they can't stand the noise, and so that looks a bit more like social anxiety. So it seems to be its own thing, and this is what the research is telling us as well, that there's no consistency in the disorders that are co-occurring with misophonia. It seems to be its own distinct thing, but it can look like a lot of other things, and it can occur alongside a lot of other things.
Okay, so someone's psychological reaction to it is independent from the thing itself. That's just the reaction they get is just the reaction, which may be a comorbid, may not be, but it seems like the thing itself deserves its own slot.
Yeah, and I think what you were saying about that idea of not being able to filter out the sound. So once it's there, once you've detected it, you just can't ignore it. And that's the same, that, like I said, with ticking clocks. Like once I've clocked a clock in the room, I literally can't unhear it. And so it just keeps ticking. And there's I don't fully understand the concept of this, but there's this thing called sensory gating, which is basically when there's repetitive sensory information, our brain is supposed to go, oh, that's the same thing I've already heard or seen or felt. I can stop hearing or seeing or feeling it now. And you can just ignore it because there's no new information coming in. But for some people...
Okay, like the way you just get used to, if you live in a city, you get used to traffic noise. And if you live on a farm, you get used to the smell of a farm and the noise of animals.
Exactly. Yes, exactly that. So you just habituate to that sensory information, and they test this in labs with this thing where they have two tones that sort of ring really close together, and some people hear it as one tone and some people hear it as two tones, and people with autism and people with panic disorder will hear more likely to hear the second tone. And it hasn't been tested in misophonia yet, but I suspect it will be the same in misophonia. The brain just treats the next one that it is as important as the first time you heard that sound.
Oh, interesting. So autism makes it more likely that you will continue to hear or continue to sense something, and less likely to habituate to it.
Exactly, and that's why people with autism often experience sensory overload, because they just keep experiencing the sensory information.
There's no adjustment.
Adjust to. Exactly.
Wow.
Oh, that makes sense.
And that's the bit that I think is just kind of natural variation. And so people who are predisposed to have misophonia probably have just a natural variation where that is just heightened for them. And in terms of group survival, it's good that some people stay tuned into things and others don't, because other people can get on with, keeping the tribe alive and all of that sort of stuff, while the people who are more alert will keep paying attention just in case something changes. So it's part of group survival. But if you then can't switch it off, and you live in a busy and loud world that we live in now, it becomes a problem. And if that's happening So a lot of people develop this during childhood. So if that happens during childhood and you can't tune out somebody who's making a pretty disgusting eating sound, and so you're getting more and more upset, and then the whole family starts laughing at you for being upset and making the sound because they think it's funny that you're getting so upset.
Yeah.
Then that sound is now linked in your brain to being like having your emotions invalidated and being picked on and criticized and being different from everybody else. And so now when you hear the sound, it's not just that you can't ignore it, it's that you also feel isolated and criticized.
Is anyone else just picturing all the chicken dance variations from Arrested Development right now?
Oh, no.
Yeah, but
I
I'm now,
wasn't,
and
I'm
to stop thinking.
curious why you were.
No, I'm fascinated that we're having on, comedian Steve Hall and Captain Hook. We're just you guys remember in Hook the clock obsession?
Oh, okay.
It was like clearly, that's how he every time a clock ticked, like
because the alligator had swallowed a clock.
an alligator had swallowed a pocket watch.
Is it an alligator or a crocodile?
Probably crocodile. I don't know.
Crocodile.
It's
but yeah,
really
his whole
important that we
thing's-
know the difference.
I mean, you're Australian. You
podcast.
should. Yeah, this is. I don't want to.
I would always assume crocodile unless proven otherwise.
As you should. Yeah, I would think Neverland would be a crocodile. No,
Yeah,
it's,
it seems more exotic.
That's fascinating, and it's something that this is a side rant. This is related but unrelated. It's strange to me online these days with like we'll get out of just science brain for a minute. Like social media, you know how like people they're completely misusing POV, like when they post like a video.
How are they using it?
Well, they're using it where it's not your point of view. It's just them doing an impression. You know what I mean? Like it'll be like POV. You're bored during an exam, and it's a guy. It's a video of a guy looking bored during an exam.
It's the opposite of a POV.
It's the opposite of a POV.
You're looking at someone who's bored. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's happening a lot. But I've noticed that something that has gone off the rails with people having no idea what they're talking about is intrusive thoughts. Where online people are talking a lot about like intrusive thoughts, just culture. It's in the zeitgeist. It's in the like Generation Z zeitgeist now. When they just mean an impulsive thought or something.
Yeah.
So
or just a thought. Just something.
Just a
that popped
thought,
into your
right?
head.
Like I can't stop the intrusive thought. It's probably going to get bangs. And it's like, well, no, that's an impulsive thought. An intrusive thought is
Although
I'm
if
going
you
to
follow
microwave
through
my
and
cat.
actually get those bangs, then
Right.
maybe you could be considered to have a disorder.
Right. Intrusive thoughts make you
But
worry
also
you're
even-
a serial killer. Like it's horrible.
Yeah, even beyond I'm going to microwave my cat, because like I haven't had that one, but like I think everyone has that sort of. Again, you sort of have that brief like, oh, what if I jump off this building, or what if I
Exactly.
turn the car into traffic? But it's
Yep.
but it's also realizing that no, everyone has those thoughts briefly. It's then whether that thought comes and goes, or whether it just sticks in your head and becomes more and more of a thing until you're really worried that you will do it, and then you
Right.
can't
And then
exist.
how much does it freak you out, and et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. Yeah. There's like thoughts that you don't invite that just pop into your head, and they can be positive, negative, or neutral. So that could just be like suddenly remembering something that happened, or wondering if you've got your keys in your pocket, and that's just a thought that pops into your head. And then there's intrusive thoughts, which everybody has, but most people don't have them very often or in a way that particularly upsets them. So like what Matt was saying about a thought that you might jump off a bridge, or that you might push someone onto the train tracks or something. We've all had those sorts of thoughts. And so that is still an intrusive thought, because the nature of an intrusive thought is that it comes in when you don't want it to, and it's distressing. So if you find it distressing, then it is intrusive. But when it becomes an obsession, and intrusive thoughts in an OCD sense, it then becomes a preoccupation, and you feel like you have to do something to make that thought go away, or to prevent that from coming true, or to mitigate the responsibility for that happening.
Of course, and I think ironically, a reason a lot of intrusive thoughts, or it's like the definition alone means you're not at risk for doing that. It's not in your nature, because you're having a thought that's not in your nature, so it's distressing.
Yes, because if you're not wanting to have that thought, then that means that you don't.
Right. I mean, I guess if you're a violent, horrible person, that is a normal thought. That might even be a little pleasing. I don't know. So if it's like super distressing, that's probably a good sign.
Like if a murderous thought was not intrusive, then you should be worried.
But then it goes the other way, right? Because I'm sure like actual sociopaths might have murderous thoughts that please them, but then also people with certain forms of OCD have murderous thoughts that then make them panic that they're actually a murderer when they're not, and then that becomes a sort of negative cycle that they can't break out of.
Of course.
Yeah, so the OCD comes from what it means that you had that thought.
I wonder if like axe murderers, like if their version of intrusive thoughts is just like helping that old woman across the street. You know, they like
oh God, get out of my head! Oh, kindness, gratitude.
Right, helping someone with their groceries, and they just go nuts thinking about it. Like, yeah.
And so it's actually a really great comparison because it's really similar with the reaction to sounds. So if you hear someone who's eating in a really loud, messy way and you think, oh, that's disgusting, and then you get on with your day, it's not really misophonia because that's just an opinion of somebody's eating. But if you think, oh God, what's wrong with me that I'm thinking such awful thoughts about somebody that I care about, or you're getting a really intense reaction that you're worried that something will happen because you're stuck with this thought, then it's getting more into the territory of misophonia.
Yeah.
So, Steve, how much do you charge your wife for the exposure therapy?
It's interesting that like the different techniques we've developed over the years, and a lot of it is just communication, because it's such a big thing to sort of say, I have to tell you your breathing makes me want to shatter your skull. That it's quite a big moment to have that conversation and then still be a couple at the end of it.
We probably shouldn't have put it in our vows.
So like one of the biggest things we do is we sleep in different bedrooms.
Okay.
And which again in terms of a relationship feels quite a taboo thing to do, but it was actually brilliant for us.
It's brought us closer together. And
No,
in a
that
dramatic
sounds great.
twist, it's not just because of the sound of Steve breathing, it's also because I'm a horrific snorer, and so I like bring on a misophonic type reaction in Steve because I am also a horrible snorer. So it's better for everyone.
And it's sort of, and then there's also the added inspiration that we then need to be able to afford the rent on one extra bedroom in the house. So it inspires us to work harder. I've noticed that I sort of feel like I've almost developed not misophonia itself, but like misophonia by proxy, where I find myself scoping out. I either get annoyed by people if I think they might trigger Jane, or I find myself kind of scoping out social situations, kind of like a Secret Service agent scanning for danger. So if we enter a cinema or if we go onto a train carriage, I'm immediately there sort of going, okay, 6 o'clock, there's 2 teenagers, they look like they're going to be chatting quite loudly. There's quite a fat guy sat over there, his breathing's going to be awful. And then the worst thing is if you see someone chewing and you're like, gum! And you dive in the way.
Gum, get out.
Why is he talking into his lapel? There's nothing there. Yeah.
No,
There's someone
also,
sitting opposite
like,
is like,
because-
I hate when someone talks into their lapel. It sets me off.
But also, because I should say, because you've both, I think, 2 of the 3 of you have mentioned exposure, and one of it's a bit of a taboo word in misophonia, because the idea of exposure therapy, the sort of classic exposure therapy where you are facing the thing that you're afraid of, or in this case, that makes you angry or causes a strong reaction, with the idea that you will get used to it eventually. And what we've actually see with misophonia is that you don't, because of that part of your brain that doesn't ignore it. Actually,
Right.
what can happen is it can intensify because your brain doesn't get used to it. And so what we do in therapy is we do use sounds as part of the therapy, but only for short bursts at a time, and never with the aim of like, we're going to get you getting used to this sound, but actually we're going to try and change the nature of the relationship with sound and decrease the intensity of the reaction. And that's part of, I was talking about the sort of layers that get added on because it's associated with being ignored at the family table, or being teased by your siblings, or getting in trouble at school or something. If we can help to pull apart those layers and all you're left with is just like, oh, I can't ignore that sound, then you can at least work with that. Like you can function with that.
Is that more like the ACT model versus the CBT?
So ACT, so that's acceptance and commitment therapy. That's kind of its own format. So the idea of that is sort of accepting things as they are and then making decisions based on what's important to you in your life. And that that emerged from CBT, so it's kind of similar strategies. But
I don't know what I'm talking about, by the way. Like that's so keep that in mind. At all times. Like I'll just say acronyms. So I'm lucky I landed on one. So some people do use that, but that's sort of grounded in the ideas of mindfulness and sort of what they call defusion, which is like detaching the emotion from the. Like if it was sounds, it would be from the sound, like sort of disconnecting a bit from the experience and observing the experience so that it doesn't cause the same reaction. But what I'm doing is more from a what we call a inhibitory learning perspective. So inhibitory learning is the idea that if you've been through experiences where sounds are connected to distress, then you will experience that distress again when you hear that sound. And if that's really intense, then it's probably more than just the way your body naturally reacts to sound. There's something else there that you've experienced along the way that has taught your brain and body to react that way. And so what we're doing is trying to use sounds and do different things when you're listening to those sounds so that you can create new connections in the brain that tell you this isn't a dangerous sound, you're not under threat, you're not being violated. You might not like it, and that's fine. You might not be able to concentrate, and that's unfortunate, but you're not in danger, and they're probably not doing it deliberately, and you're okay. So you just even if you don't feel good, you're safe. So you just sort of sit with a patient and repeat "I love you" while you slurp a milkshake, and sort of like slowly.
It's not far off,
right? So you're safe, and then you just munch. You're eating a sandwich. You're safe, and I love you.
Yeah, so we've got this thing called opposite action, which is you do the opposite of what your instincts tell you to do, because what we do actually reinforces what feels true to us. So if what it feels like is this other person is doing this deliberately and how dare they, and so what you do is you glare at them and you hope that they notice that you're glaring at them because you really want them to know they're doing something wrong. So the opposite of that might be to smile at them or to say I love you while they're sipping their milkshake. And all the things that I do in therapy and that I put in my book and talk about in my research, I try everything myself. So poor Steve has had times where I'm like, I'm just going to test something. Could you just eat this bag of crisps, please? And then I'll gaze adoringly at him while he eats them so that I can test for myself.
So that's almost like a DBT type thing. That's the last acronym I know.
You're making these up now, Jesse.
No, I'm not. I'm not.
DBT
I'm a BLT therapy advocate. Yeah.
No, DBT is a real thing, but it's the opposite work.
Therapy.
I mean,
yes,
I just mean the opposite work.
Stuff comes from that. So in DBT, I think it might be radical acceptance, which is the idea of sort of coming to terms with how things are, and that's definitely part of what you need to do with misophonia, because it's coming to terms with your brain processing things differently and people not behaving the way that you wish they would. But it's also about trying to change things. It's not just about accepting that. It's that the theory is that there's something that you've experienced that is causing you to react with the intensity that you are, and therefore we want to create new experiences with those sounds that overrides those old experiences. And so sometimes it's just, I'm sorry, I'm trying not to make any weird noises into the microphone. So
we've all been muting nonstop.
I noticed we've been up in our muting game this episode.
I live next to train tracks, and like 3 trains have gone by during this podcast. I've had to mute.
I'm impressed. If people in the misophonia realm are listening to this, they're going to be very happy that you've done that. Or they probably still will pick up on tiny sounds that you won't even notice.
But if they're autistic, they're mad they missed out on those trains. So it's a double-edged sword.
Now, do we have any theories? When I say we, I mean you, and then I take credit later as we. No. Do you
I'll put you down as co-author on my next paper.
No. Here's my big question: is
just thanks will do. Just sort of
the opposite of misophonia. And I say this because every now and then
I was going to ask the same thing.
Well, every now and then I'll search for like an ASMR video,
right,
you know,
right.
like a weird slow hotel check-in or something. But like, because they'll make me sleepy, and
Yeah.
But then half of them are just people just like eating lasagna into a microphone,
really close to a condenser mic.
People really enjoy that. There's a community of people that are
they're into it.
Very into it.
So for people who are listening who don't know, ASMR is autosensory meridian response.
That was my last acronym. I'm not.
I mean, technically, that's an initialism. They all have been.
It often gets, when people are talking about it on social media, they talk about it as if it's the sounds, like these are ASMR sounds, and actually the response, ASMR is the response, and so ASMR is actually the tingly feeling that you get in response to certain sensory information. So for some people, that's certain sounds that give you a tingly feeling. Sometimes, I get it if someone scratches the back of my neck, like I get a sort of tingly feeling, or if I listen to certain songs, I get a tingly feeling. So
I get it, and again, it was only once sort of people started talking about ASMR videos and stuff that I realized this thing was a thing that I've identified from childhood. But we've talked about this on the show about our different triggers. I think Jesse and I have similar triggers, which is just sort of someone very patiently explaining something very basic or potentially wrong. I love a well-meaning psychic, for example, when someone's just talking absolute like woo bollocks at me, but really sincerely, and so this is what this means. I'm like, that's not what it means, you little sweetheart, but this is great. Carry on going.
Matt, I have a video that I watch all the time. It's like 2 hours long, and it's this guy giving you a tour of his shoe store. But it's like it's a bespoke shoe store, so he's explaining all the different leather cuts and stuff. You'll be in heaven, man. Cloud, it's the most boring thing I've ever seen in my life, and I'll just watch it.
but that's the thing. I don't get set off by those kind of sounds or anything. Those videos for the most part. But yeah, sorry, you're saying, Jay.
Yeah. So when people are talking about it as if the ASMR is the sound itself, they say, "Oh, I hate ASMR sounds," but actually, it's that some people get an ASMR response to the sounds that people with misophonia get a negative reaction to. It just happens to be some of the same sounds, and when they've studied the two things together, there's actually a correlation that people who experience ASMR also have higher scores in misophonia. So they're actually related. So there's something about a sort of hypersensory experience. It's just that sometimes that experience goes down a negative sort of repulsion or anger or panic response, and sometimes it goes down the pleasure response. But they're both a hyper attention and a hyper response to particular sounds, and usually soft sounds and repetitive sounds.
Right.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
The ASMR thing that sort of leads into something that I was going to ask about, but I don't want to seem super cynical when I ask that. But ASMR is sort of a recent, I think at least like it's sort of like taken off as a thing. I don't know if the actual initialism is relatively recent. I think it kind of is, right?
Yeah, I think similar to misophonia, it was only given a name relatively recently, but obviously
right. And I wonder because is there any? Basically, the comparison I'm wondering about is, I don't know if you heard the trend during COVID of so many kids suddenly getting diagnosed with Tourette's with coincidentally the same symptoms as this one prominent TikToker, like saying the word beans. And you're like, okay, well, maybe there's something else at play. You hadn't heard about that?
No, I had. But I really struggle with like TikTok or Reels because because I can't predict what sounds I'm going to hear, and I don't like the jumping to a sound and not being able to control.
It's named after a clock
volume
sound.
and
That's like not the app for you. It's the worst. Yeah. Horrible.
Is that also literally the name of the crocodile in Peter Pan?
Yeah. But it's like if there was a new social media app for my comedy, but it was called People Eating Lasagna. Like I wouldn't. I'm not going to be on it. I'm not downloading it. Not doing
It's
it.
just Garfield that's the only user of that one.
Yeah.
But basically, my question is there any possibility that there's some aspect of social contagion in this? Or is that not a thing you're even looking into? Or does it not matter? Because some people obviously have a real problem with it. So who cares if some others are hearing about it and then be like, oh, that sounds like, or even if it's not a conscious decision. But I guess if you don't even know the analogy I'm talking about with those Tourette's or multiple personality TikTokers.
I'm not studying that directly myself, and I think it's not that important, because once you start to do that, you start to undermine the experience of people who are really suffering, and there are a lot fewer people who are faking it or copying than there are people who are suffering, and so if we accidentally help some people who aren't really suffering, I don't care.
There's no harm in
as
that.
long as the people who are suffering are getting the help they need.
That makes sense. Apologies for the cynicism. Cynicism over.
I'm going to be.
Well, I mean,
Googling.
do you think a lot of that
beans
is? Do you think a lot of that is the same way? I guess all of us were children pre-social media. So
speak for yourself.
Sure. I certainly was. So the same way. I mean, I remember wanting to be. The people you look up to, I guess these days they're like TikTok stars. So instead of trying to act like Kurt Cobain or something, it's saying beans,
right? That's
or
true.
something. You know what I mean? Like if it. So if that's
the circle
possible,
of influence has just grown. Like you didn't have access to as many different people in the past, and now. There's all the information is out there. So I think there are just more people that are out there to copy, and then once the sort of contagion, I think you used the term social contagion of that, it spreads much quicker because there are more people influencing what you do.
And I find the not knowing. I hate the not knowing where the thing has come from. So sometimes, our 7-year-old son, for example, he's got quite into Minecraft. So we've let him watch a few Minecraft related YouTube videos.
Sure.
And we thought they were all acceptable for a 7-year-old. And out of nowhere, our 7-year-old has started regularly saying D's nuts. So we've realised we haven't done the parental controls as well as we should.
It could be one of those parallel thoughts things, like Newton and Leibniz both discovering calculus at the same time.
Right.
He didn't believe us that it had its origins in testicles. Like we were trying to explain to him, you are saying balls, and he's going, no, I'm not. It's not what it
Wow.
Interesting fact, by the way, before TikTok, Kurt Cobain's kid was only called Francis Cobain.
Hey!
There we go. That's been loaded up for about a minute and a half.
It's a deep cut.
It would have been equally bad a minute and a half ago, but at least it would have been
for.
pertinent.
Yeah, it was worth waiting for. That was
cut and paste, Matt. Just move it back to where it belongs.
Just waiting for the gap in the conversation.
Oh, I just mean that when we were children, we're emulating people we looked up to. Generally, they were in the arts in some way, or they had made some sort of product instead of just vloggers. Right, so people are acting like whatever now because people are famous for no reason. I'm not doing a back in our day it was better thing. I'm just
sounds like you are.
Okay, I am. I'm getting old and cranky. I'm old and cranky now. I just mean they're emulating different.
It makes yeah, I get what you're saying.
The fame has changed, So like being a big YouTuber or something is.
Well, yeah, it's literally when they ask kids what they want to be when they grow up, that's the number one answer now.
Right. So it's looking up to a different thing. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. Looking up to a different thing.
It just is.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe little kids are doing they're also trying to do the ASMR videos. Like you show up to first grade and there's just very calm talking people dressed like a stewardess.
Every 6-year-old has a ribbon mic at their desk.
Yeah.
Just scraping their fingernails on it.
Whispering
Extremely
into
expensive ribbon mics. Yeah, who knows?
When I grow up, I want to be a fake hairdresser. That's what I want to be. I want to pretend to cut someone's hair.
Have you watched those videos where they use the binaural mics and put a wig on it and cut its hair?
No.
I haven't seen the ones where they go as far as the wig, but
Yeah, you put on headphones, and I used to do it during the pandemic when we're still in a pandemic, but you can't go get a haircut, so or travel. So that's how I got into it. I would watch fake hotel check-ins and fake haircut videos to pretend I was doing stuff because I'm very pathetic, And it's a lot of gear. It's a lot of kit.
I went down a bit of a spiral of watching train spotting videos. So I was just interested by the culture of train spotters. And they're really sweary. For some reason, I'd had an image of train spotters as being a certain type of slightly affable nerdiness, but they're absolutely potty-mouthed. They're sort of, and they're kind of they're shouting at train drivers to give them a toot or give them a flail, but they're effing and jeffing while they do it.
And meanwhile, I went to work and wrote a book.
I think our listeners are going to relate to Steve a little more on this one, but
Oh, wow.
But believe me, I'm doing my second PhD. Material is not very relatable.
Steve just keeps watching YouTube and breathing. Just breathing. Sitting there existing.
You have some good breath today, Steve, did you?
Do you have some loud breaths?
How many breaths did you take today?
Your tea?
That I don't need to ask that because the answer is always yes. You were asking before about some of the things we do around the home, and actually that the seating positions when we're watching stuff is one of the things that we've organised so that at the very least I don't have to see the tea going to his mouth, so that it's the anticipation of the slurp that's part of the problem. So I bought a bean bag so that I can sit on the floor without
subclinical, guys. Subclinical.
Like any normal human being would. I bought a bean bag.
She sweeps the dead pigeons out of the chimney pillow, and then she sits on the bean bag. This is subclinical. All right.
If the pigeons were dead, I wouldn't have a problem with it because they would be quiet.
That's true.
So tell us more about the book. This is a book. 'Cause your PhD is obviously aimed at academia, but is the book for the general public?
Yeah, it's a self-help book. Yes, so it's the sort of target audience is people who have just discovered what misophonia is and want to learn more about it and learn some strategies for improving things.
And when's this book out, or is it already available?
Oh no, it's not out till September. Apparently it takes a really long time to make a book, so I'm not officially promoting it yet. It's just happening.
That's going to be the most tedious audiobook recording you've ever done.
Yeah,
we've
already had 3 meetings about the audiobook.
How are we going to pull this off, guys?
It's almost, I think it might have to be narrated by AI. You might have to get it might have to be Siri does the narration for it, so it's completely clean.
We were talking about who you would try and get for the audiobook. Whether you would you do it yourself, or would you get a?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, in terms of, because there's a few celebrity misophonia sufferers.
There is, yeah.
Are they out? Can we?
Yeah, there are quite a few who've talked about it. Sarah Silverman is one of them. She talks about it a bit on Twitter. Melanie Linsky. Someone told me that. Who was it that I said yesterday?
Well, Ricky Gervais, a lot of people think is. But your colleague just recently interviewed Lisa Loeb.
Oh, yeah, Lisa Loeb.
Huh.
Oh, she's got a good narration voice.
Which I think you said on Twitter that it made the lyric, "You say I only hear what I want to,"
brought a new meaning. Whoever accused her of that has to have apologised by now.
Wow.
Yeah, get Lisa Loeb to do the audio. I can see Melanie
Linsky being a good. Yeah, they both got good voices. Melanie Linsky.
And I do feel like Melanie Linsky could play me in an audio movie. She's got the New Zealand accent. It's pretty close.
Yeah, I'm sure she can do. I think she's probably got all the accents covered. I feel like she's someone who's good at accents in general.
So, Melanie, if you're listening, get in touch.
What is she known for? I'm Googling her right now.
You do.
Melanie Linsky. She's most recently in the first series of Yellow Jackets.
Oh, I still haven't seen that yet. Okay.
She was in a brilliant series called Togetherness. I think it was an HBO series.
And she's
what's
in
the film that I love?
Is it Beautiful Creatures? Is it? What's it?
Oh, she was in Heavenly Creatures.
No, Heavenly Creatures.
Heavenly Creatures, sorry.
Yeah, with Kate Winslet. And that's what I first knew her from. She's brilliant.
That was like one of the first Peter Jackson movies, I think, right?
Yeah.
Exactly, yep.
Yeah. But she's done a lot of them. You would have seen her in a bunch of things.
Okay.
For sure.
Well, she was in what's the terrible the Charlie Sheen, John Cryer.
Two and a Half Men.
2.5 Men. She was in that as well. So she's had quite the career.
Oh, she was. You realise I don't think I ever have seen a full episode of 2.5 Men, but I think I've seen many half 2.5 Men.
Let's put that out into the universe. We need to get her on board for this audiobook.
Is the plural 2.5? Oh, she was in the reboot of What Hot American Summer.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Which I know you've seen.
Definitely.
Anyway, you've seen her in a bunch of things.
Yep.
If people
Perks of
want to
being a wallflower.
see, if people want to see you guys in a bunch of things, how can they find you? If people wanted to find a Dr. Jane Gregory, check out a website. If people wanted to check out Steve Hall, how would they go about it?
Well, they could find a Dr. Jane Gregory by typing in at Dr. Jane Gregory on social media. Only 2 social medias because I am old. So I'm on Instagram and Twitter, and I only just started doing that in the last couple of years. But for the misophonia stuff, I also have a website, soundslikemissophonia.com. And now that I've finished writing my book, I'm going to get back to... My plan for that is to keep updating it as new research gets published. I'll write little summaries of what the research is and what it means and how it might apply to people with misophonia.
Excellent.
And then also your general website as well, where you have your general clinical thing, your CBT websites also.
I'm not really updating that at the moment, so I don't recommend that people go looking for me there. It's a bit out of date now.
Fair enough.
And are you practicing, or are you just doing research these days?
At the moment, I'm mostly research. My job is partly research and partly within the NHS as well. So I'm seeing and supervising patients with misophonia in our clinic in Oxford. But most of my week is research.
Cool. Very
and
cool.
Steve?
I'm recording an hour. There's a wonderful website called production company called Go Faster Stripe, who makes some excellent stuff. And Chris, who runs Go Faster Stripe, wants to film me doing an hour, so I'm doing that in April.
Sweet. Where are you recording it?
At the Chapter Art Centre in Cardiff.
Oh, right. That's where they always... That's
it. That's his kind of his HQ. But
if I remember rightly, it started off... Was Simon Munnery the first one he did? Or was
it was kind of Simon Munnery and Stuart Lee and Will Hodgson and people like that.
Yeah, it basically started off this sort of... correct me if I'm wrong, but I think basically a big comedy fan who was based in Cardiff was sort of just annoyed that you could only get the big names on DVD at Christmas. You could only get your sort of Michael McIntyres and whatever playing the Apollo. And he was like, why isn't there a DVD of people I really like Simon Munnery and Josie Long? And then went, and then got a few mates together and basically said, let's do this. And now has a production company with a really good repertoire of a really good library of some really awesome. Great comics.
That's exactly it. And so he's got a subscriber base. And so if you subscribe to Go Faster Stripe, anything they put out, you can then stream. And it's he hasn't put out anything bad, basically. It's one of those where just being invited to do it is as big a compliment as I could get because his roster is just amazing.
Yeah,
so it sounds like it's like a good record label or something where you're just like they just pick good stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly and a good record label that started up entirely with not really any kind of big commercial ambition. It was started up just because he's like, I want a recording of this show and no one's doing a recording of this show, so fuck it, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, totally.
That's cool.
Totally.
So you said you haven't recorded that yet. It's coming up?
Yeah, so I'm recording that in April.
Okay.
I am.
And we all know you're going to wind up doing this audiobook too. You're going to do it. You're going to be extra breathy with it. It's in fact, by the end of the audiobook, you're cured. That's how
I'm going to...
It's like subliminal exposure.
I'm going to eat digestive biscuits all the way through.
Right. But never mention it. By the end, the last chapter is just eat. You just have a meal. And that's it.
You're going to sniff a big bag of pollen before every recording day.
Wow. That won't be necessary.
Yep, no resentment there. Well,
subclinical, guys. Subclinical.
Hashtag subclinical.
Yeah.
Let's get that trending.
How are your train spotting videos? Okay. Just have a knife.
I'll just be over here on the beanbag.
Don't look at me.
Just with the blinkers on, so I can't see when you're raising a mug to your mouth.
I have been known to. Oh no! So this is just going to make me sound even worse. To like put, because I wear glasses, so just putting my hair over the arm of my glasses and sort of wrapping it around so that it does create a blinker like experience.
Again, subclinical. And
We are not.
visit soundslikmisophonia.com for more info. And we'll, of course, update our listeners when the book and the comedy special are out. You guys can find those later on this year.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Absolutely,
for people who are interested in doing misophonia research as well, just in case you're not aware of it.
Absolutely.
Check out the Misophonia Research Fund, because it's literally millions of dollars being spent on misophonia research. It's amazing. So,
and those are non-crinkly bills. Those are flat. There's no coins. It's zero coins.
It's a wire transfer. It's like nothing happens. There's not even a beep. The sound's off. But yeah, that's a good point. We definitely have people who, I know we have listeners who work in clinical psychology, psychiatry. So yeah, if that is something you're interested in, or just, I'm sure you're also, Jane, available to be messaged and for collaborations and the like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And also, if you want to take part in research as a research participant, I have a mailing list on my website that you can sign up, and I'll email you when studies are recruiting participants as well. We have the best research participants in misophonia. Every other researcher I know is always complaining about recruiting, and we have had no problem because everyone is so enthusiastic to be part of the process and to help raise awareness and make change through research. So it's been a phenomenal.
I mean, that makes
process.
perfect sense, because if you've had this thing for years and it's only recently had a name, and no one really, particularly like you said, if it's amplified by family members not believing you and even aggravating it when you're younger and things like that, and not being properly listened to, the idea that you would then have someone in a real research lab with real qualifications going like, no, this is a thing and we're actually researching it on a clinical level and we need participants.
Yeah,
so
yeah, and
you are not alone, and this is a known thing, and we're trying to work out how to make it better.
Exactly. Just the fact that the research exists is validation in itself, and especially I'm doing my research at Oxford, which is a huge endorsement of misophonia research, that they wanted me here doing my research, and I'm funded by the Wellcome Trust, and that's one of the biggest medical research funders in the world. So again, just the endorsement of those two huge institutions is a really important step for misophonia.
Yeah. No, that's incredible.
And also, I'm contractually obliged to mention Oxford. So, first rule of Oxford Club is always mention Oxford.
So yeah, let both participants and researchers get in touch, get on that. If it's something you're interested in or something you've been dealing with, then do that. And yeah, find those websites. Find Steve online and find out when he's doing shows around the UK, because he's generally very, very funny anyway. And then if you're not anywhere near where he's performing, go and get the Go Faster Stripe subscription, and you won't regret it, because multiple past friends of the show are on it, and just a bunch of really great comics that you might not have heard of. So do those things. You can find us, as always, probablyscience.com. on Twitter at probablyscience, individually at Andy T. Wood, at Jesse Case, and at Matt Kirshen. And probablyscience@gmail.com is the email address for any questions, comments, clarifications, and stories you would like us to cover. But again, Dr. Jane Gregory and Steve Hall, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Thanks
Cheers.
for having us.
Thank you.
And thank you for your silence between talking.
Oh, you're very welcome.